Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode we're going to talk about the end of an iconic career. And yes, you may know by the thumbnail, we're talking about the legendary Sting. And while his career isn't quite over yet, he has announced recently that he plans on retiring at Revolution in 2024, which would mark 4 years from the first AEW Revolution that he debuted on for AEW. I'm going to talk a little bit about the career of Sting, and this is just going to be scratching the surface, basically a minor tribute to him, and I'm sure at the time when he retires I'll do another one, because I have such reverence for Sting. You may have noticed it in any video I've talked about him, or any time his name comes up in a topic I'm talking about. I really think of Sting as one of the greats of all time, one of the most iconic wrestlers, one of the most important wrestlers, especially in my lifetime, one of my favorite wrestlers. And I know he gets a lot of praise and not a lot of compliments, but I still think he's a little bit underrated. What I'm going to do here, I'll just talk a little bit about his career, cover some of the things that I think make Sting one of the biggest icons in wrestling, and why this is so important, and why I think he needs to be celebrated. Let's take it all the way back to the beginning. 1985. Sting and a group of other wrestlers under the tutelage of Rick Bassman, I believe that's what his name was, form a group called Power Team USA in the California Indies. And it's good, but there's not much. I mean, it's basically your 80s muscle-bound, let's face it, over-steroided wrestlers. Two of these guys would stand out. One would be Sting, the other would be the Ultimate Warrior. And as you may know, both these guys would go on to have fantastic careers. From that, the two of them would leave and they would join the CWA in Memphis and Knoxville, and they would become the Freedom Fighters. Basically the same thing with an all-American gimmick, just two big, muscular bodybuilders with a somewhat American theme to them. This didn't really work, so after a little while, they would morph into the Blade Runners. This was where the Ultimate Warrior would change his name to Rock and Sting would become Sting. And they started doing what a lot of tag teams in the mid-80s would do, and that's kind of took a lot of inspiration from the Road Warriors. This would be the first time that both guys really started gaining some traction. They would go from the CWA over to the UWF with Bill Watts, and they would become part of Eddie Gilbert and Missy Hyatt's group, which was Hot Stuff Incorporated at the time. Ultimately, the Ultimate Warrior that at that time would leave and go to World Class to become the Dingo Warrior, but Sting would stay. And I've seen a lot of interviews and a lot of talk. Eddie Gilbert really saw something in Sting and really saw that he could be a main event guy. And Eddie had a lot of sway with Bill Watts, so he was portrayed as a guy that would be a main event. He would pick up tag titles with Gilbert, Rick Steiner. He'd pick up their television title by himself, really building a lot of momentum. Fast forward a little bit, about a year later in 1987, Jim Crockett Promotions buys out the UWF and basically combines their rosters. Kind of similar to when WWE bought out WCW, if you're a little bit of a younger fan. And this is really when the ascension of Sting just really started going at a rapid pace. He instantly was one of the few guys that came over in that buyout that really made a mark and really cemented himself as a top star in Crockett's company. It becomes very obvious that Sting is destined to be a superstar. Everything he does, the fans are jumping on board with him. His matches look good. He looks great. He's a superhero. At the same time, the Ultimate Warrior is doing the same thing over in the WWE. They had a very similar trajectory. About a year into his run at the 1988 Clash of the Champions, the very first one, you get the first real defining moment of Sting's career when him and Ric Flair would wrestle in the main event of that Clash of Champions in a 1 hour time limit draw. Was really about 45 minutes. But this was really where Sting took that jump and took that extra step. And he went from just a guy with a lot of fans to being one of the guys, or considered one of the guys to run the company, or the company could be based around. And a lot of that could be attributed to the Nature Boy Ric Flair, which kudos to him. He saw something in Sting, and he said, I could make this guy, and I could have a friend, and I could have a foe for the next decade and a half of my career, The two's career are so entwined with each other. They pretty much are the history of WCW between Flair and Sting. Every important moment in WCW history, or at least 99% of them, either somehow involves Sting or somehow involves Ric Flair. So this was the coronation of a brand new star, and he was immediately looked to be on the same level as Ric Flair, the greatest wrestler of all time, and definitely the best wrestler that most fans seen at that time. After that, in 1989, we would see him and Flair kind of form a friendship at times. He would have feuds with the Great Muta while Flair was feuding with Terry Funk, which led to their Halloween Havoc tag team match. But the matches with Muta and Sting, these are some of my favorite matches of all time, especially in this era. You set yet another longtime rival for Sting, another guy that no matter where, no matter when, if you tell me Sting and the Great Muta are going to wrestle each other, to this day, I'm going to watch that because of what they set way back in 1989. Here you have, again, much like I said with the Warrior, you have the guy in America in Sting and the guy for Japan in Muta for New Japan Pro Wrestling, who are going to be the faces of their companies and had such a similar and parallel path clashing with each other. And they were just great matches. It was just fun to watch. All this ultimately would lead to Sting becoming a Four Horseman for a little while, and then the Horsemen turning on him, which leads us to the next great moment in Sting's career. And that's the 1990 Great American Bash. Sting versus Ric Flair for the WCW Championship. And this match and this moment means a whole lot to me personally. To this day, I can remember this vividly because this was the first pay-per-view that I took my own money and bought. Previously, I had gotten WCW pay-per-views and WWE pay-per-views, but it was either my stepdad purchased them for me, or my mom would purchase them for me if I did something good in school, or I would watch it at somebody's house that was getting it. This was the first time that I really took my own money and put it into this. And I don't remember where I got the money from, whether it be from doing odd jobs around the neighborhood or I just saved up my allowance money or whatever it was. But I gave my mom the money to make the purchase for this event because I had to see Sting win the World Championship. And that's exactly what he did here. This was another one of those moments where all of the build-up, all of the rise of Sting really culminated in him becoming the guy. And for the next decade in WCW, as long as WCW was a company, he was the flag bearer. Through their dark times, through their high times, through their everything, Sting was the guy. And I'm gonna go a little bit quickly through this portion of his career. I could talk ad nauseum about his different feuds like Muta and Flair, and the ones during this run against Big Van Vader and Cactus Jack, and just how great he was and how great these matches were. But that would all probably deserve its own specific video. Feuds against the Dangerous Alliance were just fantastic. The next big moment I want to talk about with Sting is in 1996. And if you may or may not know, you probably do if you're watching this, 1996 was the year that the NWO became a thing. And for a little while, Sting was starting to grow out of his quote-unquote surfer look. He had let his hair turn to its natural brown color. He had grown it a little bit longer. He didn't quite look like the multicolored face-painted Sting. This is when the change really happened. As part of the NWO storyline, they brought in a fake Sting, which tricked everyone in WCW to thinking that Sting was part of the NWO, including Lex Luger. Heck, it even tricked editors at WWE who put the fake Sting on the back of a Sting retrospective DVD they put out a couple of years back, which kind of led to Sting questioning himself and also questioning WCW and what they stood for. Because here was a guy that always stood up for WCW, and now you're questioning him? This would be the evolution of what is called the Crow Sting, which obviously took heavy influence from the Brandon Lee movie. For a year and a half, Sting would torment the NWO without wrestling a match. He would drop from the rafters, He would come out of the crowd, and it was all leading to a build-up. And that build-up was for 1997 Starrcade. And to me, for my money, this was one of the best build-ups for one match that I've ever seen in my life. This goes right up there with the Mega Powers exploding, the Taz and Sabu feud from ECW, the Bloodline storyline that's going on right now. This feud, to me, was one of the great pieces of storytelling in the history of pro wrestling. Unfortunately, as you may or may not know, Starrcade 1997 was kind of a downer. You had the match. Sting finally got Hulk Hogan for a World Championship match, and what should have been a triumph and good WCW defeating Evil, the NWO, got mired in a lot of backstage controversy, and let's just call a spade, it was bullshit. There's a fast count that was a normal count with Nick Patrick. There's a fact that Hulk Hogan controlled 90% of the match and Sting didn't look as dominant as I think he should have, and a lot of people agree with me on that. There's a lot of rumor and innuendo about why this decision was made, whether it be Bischoff that made it, whether it be Hulk Hogan strong-arming his creative power. A lot was said about Sting not being in shape, but go back and look at it. Sting's in great shape there. He may not have been in ring shape because it was a year and a half since he wrestled, and he may have had some demons, but you can't tell me that Sting wasn't in better shape and could wrestle a better match than other people similarly in that era, like Roddy Piper, no offense, one of my favorites of all time, who had a match against Hulk Hogan, which was a stinker. The Starrcade match could have really been great. It could have really been the cherry on top on one of the great stories in wrestling history. Unfortunately, to me, I think it's one of WCW's biggest blunders and one of the reasons why people decided to start watching Raw more than WCW, because everybody wanted to see that storyline pay out. Now, fast forward a bit into what I consider another huge misstep in the career of Sting, and that's Sting joining the Wolfpack. Now, don't get me wrong, he had some great matches as part of the Wolfpack. I really enjoyed the Wolfpack as an angle myself. But to me, you have Sting, who was the guy for WCW, the one holding the flag and rallying against the NWO, now joining a version of the NWO. It just didn't feel right. It didn't feel like he fit. Did he look cool with the red face paint? Yeah, he really did. Did he have some great matches during that time? Yeah, he did, definitely. But the Wolfpack Sting it didn't feel right to me. It wasn't Sting. It wasn't the white meat babyface. It wasn't the Crow. It was just another guy in the Wolfpack. And basically, like he did throughout his whole career, Sting ignored the fact that here are some wrestlers that just a few months ago were beating you up with a baseball bat. I digress. We're going to fast forward a bit. We're not going to talk too much about the end of WCW because it's a topic that I've covered to death, that every wrestling website and every wrestling YouTube channel has covered to death. So we're going to keep it rolling. 2003. After a couple years out of the limelight, Sting decides to join TNA. And what a lot of people question as why would a big star like Sting go to a company like TNA, there's several reasons. If you look at the WWE invasion angle and how poorly a lot of the WCW wrestlers were treated and handled, it's pretty obvious why Sting would have not wanted to go there. Even though most of us were clamoring for the matches he could have had, obviously the one that sticks out in most people's minds, The Undertaker and Sting, or Cena and Sting, or Batista and Sting, or Randy Orton and Sting, any of these great matches he could have had in that era, we missed out on. But I don't think it was a bad decision. I don't think it was a bad idea, because we did have Sting in TNA. And in TNA, he had some great matches, whether it would be against Abyss, Kurt Angle, AJ Styles, Jeff Jarrett. Sting was allowed to be Sting again. And for a lot of the TNA run, Sting, to me, was one of their highlights. Him, AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, the X Division, kind of felt like WCW did with the cruiserweights and Sting being there, and other wrestlers in WCW like Lex Luger or Booker T or Scott Steiner. That's kind of the vibe that TNA had with some of its great wrestlers it had and some of the great shows it had. And I know a lot of people like to dunk on TNA and really crap on it. There's some greatness there, and there's some really good stuff. Yeah, there was some bad things. I'm not going to sit here and say it was all sunshine and roses, but it was a great place for Sting. Heck, we even seen another evolution of Sting's character during his TNA run, and that's what a lot of people affectionately call the Joker Sting era, where he had a little bit more of a unhinged Heath Ledger Joker inspired gimmick. I really enjoyed his stuff in TNA. I thought it was awesome. Now let's fast forward a little bit to 2014. It finally happened. The one wrestler that was considered to be the best wrestler to never wrestle in WWE joined the WWE. And there's a lot I could say about his WWE run. I believe he only had 5-6 matches total. The biggest thing I could say about the run is disappointing. And it's not on Sting, which we'll explain that here in a moment. The match with Triple H. I don't know that anybody wanted to see that match the way it panned out, the way it worked out. I don't think that anybody came out of that with a really great feeling. And this is not a knock on Triple H. I really enjoyed Triple H's career. It just felt like a misstep. The injury with Rollins. It was so unfortunate because Seth Rollins is a great wrestler. And I don't think, as a matter of fact, I know for a fact, he wouldn't have wanted to injure such an icon. That led to Sting ultimately retiring. So let's fast forward a bit from there. 2020. We start getting vignettes saying winter is coming to AEW. Well, the payoff on the show that's called Winter is Coming is Sting. And immediately, much like his presentation at TNA and WCW, you're reminded what made Sting special. And not saying that WWE didn't have moments where you felt that Sting was special. I just don't think they ever got who Sting was and what made him Sting. He would go on to join forces with Darby Allin in his feud with Team Taz, leading to his match there at 2000 with Revolution, at Revolution in 2000. And that was a cinematic match because at the time the theory was that Sting couldn't do much because of his advanced age. I mean, he was over 60 at the time of signing there. Since that time, we've got to see a middle-aged or even older than middle-aged lunatic in Sting. This is a guy who 1,000,000% should not be doing the stuff he is doing or has been doing on TNA Wrestling. The dives out of the balconies, the going through tables, the absolute insane stuff that you would think Darby Allin or young Hardy Boys would do. This 60-plus-year-old man is doing. And he's given us some of the best moments and some of the most fun wrestling matches in the history of AEW. Now we're going to fast forward that a bit to just this past Wednesday. It was hyped up that Sting was going to make an announcement on Dynamite, which led to, obviously, the big announcement. Sting has said that at Revolution 2024, he's going to hang up the boots. He's going to finally retire. And unlike his 2018 retirement, he said that this one is definitely final, and the only thing certain is he is going to retire. This immediately hit me, which is why I'm making this video. And I thought back on all these great moments that I mentioned here and all these great times, over 30 years of watching the guy wrestle. And it's much like a TV show like The Simpsons. It might not be as good as it was in its peak, but at times Sting has those flashes of Sting when he was a young wrestler. And he reminds you of that. And kind of like The Simpsons, you always felt like Sting was going to be there. I mean, at this point, Sting is professional wrestling. I am going to talk just a bit about Revolution and what my ideas would be for a match. I do think they need to set the whole show as a tribute to Sting. They need to have him front and center. His retirement match needs to be the main event. I don't care what other matches you have on that card. Whatever they decide on, they're going out with. I think he needs to be in the main event. And here's some of the things I think they need to do. On that show, they need to show as many highlights as they're allowed to show, whether they borrow some from TNA, whether they just show pictures, which I believe they're allowed to show of WCW. They have to go through that whole gambit of his career. The second thing I think they need to do, they need to bring in luminaries and icons for this. Much like we've seen with Ric Flair's last match, how guys like Bret Hart, Mick Foley, and The Undertaker were all sitting ringside. We need to see guys that are that important to Sting's career. Guys like Lex Luger, the aforementioned Ric Flair, Kevin Nash, the Great Muta, Mick Foley. Although I think Foley, out of all those guys, has the least chance of showing up because I don't think he wants to really mess with his ties with WWE. Nash as well, he may not for that same reason, but I think you at least have to make an effort. Bring guys like Kurt Angle. You already have a guy like Samoa Joe there. And even if it's just them talking about what Sting meant to their career in little vignettes, or even just having them sitting in the front row for Sting's last match, would mean so much to the presentation. The other thing, I've heard rumored, and one of the biggest ones is Vince Russo saying it, I've heard people say that his last match should be against Ric Flair. Well, I would not complain if they did that, and I would totally be on board if that was Sting's idea for a last match. I really think that Sting's last match, he should wrestle Darby Allin. Come full circle with his mentorship of Darby. Have this be the moment that really pushes Darby Allin into the main event scene, much like 1988 when Ric Flair pushed Sting into the main event scene by that big match at Clash of the Champions. You can have a match with Darby Allin. Either Darby goes over or they go to a draw, or even if Sting wins, you elevate Darby Allin with that, make him basically the de facto Sting for this generation, which he already kind of is. Strap that rocket ship to him, set him on a course that leads to him being the AEW World Champion, all while giving respect to the legend of Sting. And this is just my opinion of what I think they should do. I'm going to be watching it no matter what he does, no matter what they decide. And I just wanted to make this video to kind of talk about Sting for a bit, and how awesome he is, and how much I respect him, and how much his career really means to pro wrestling. There'll never be another wrestler like Sting. There'll be a lot to try, but no one will ever be him again. One of the biggest icons in the history of wrestling. It's with great reverence that I bring to you this video. With that being said, let's smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. And if you see where it says join, that's how you become a channel member. Becoming a channel member would really help me out. With all that being said, if you made it this far, leave me a comment on your favorite Sting moment, favorite Sting match, your favorite era of Sting, whether it be Joker Sting, Crow Sting, Surfer Sting, Blade Runner Sting, if you love that. Let me know in the comments some great memory you have of Sting. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another Heel Heat video.